this celebration and exploration of the world of Harry Partch, wonderful creative force in the universe. And in doing so, I'd like to introduce an additional creative force in the universe: composer, poet, philosopher, humanitarian, champion of all things beautiful, Lou Harrison.
Before I begin reading my paper, I would like very much to say that when Harry died, Danley gave me permission to have blueprints made of most all of Harry's scores. When I received them, I donated them to the special collections of San Jose State Library. So they're here for study if anybody wishes to use them. And an anecdote. I often met with Harry Partch when he was in Gate 5 and would come to San Francisco, and I could come up from the peninsula where I was living. Pardon me. This comes from living on the coast. By the way, pardon me, I have a getaway place that I've just finished in Joshua Tree, down in the southern desert that I'm having, exactly for this kind of problem. Get tomorrow morning, get the San Francisco Chronicle and look in the magazine section, and you will find a story and pictures of my getaway place in Joshua Tree. One of the reasons is that it's built entirely of straw bales. The other is an anecdote about Harry. In San Francisco, we were once on a streetcar, and I had made the discovery that harps have a twister which pulls the string up, and you tune to C flat, and then you have a natural and then a sharp, so that you can get 3 pitches off every string. Well, 7 times 3 is 21 pitches. With 2 harps, you could get 42. So I told this to Harry on the streetcar. He looked at me and said, "Yeah, that's true." I said, "Perhaps you could forego a 43rd tone once in a while." And he said, "Yes, but I don't like the harp." So it's an honor for me to be asked to join in this festivity, for the concerns which we celebrate and consider here are dear to me. I often think of a few instruments in a smallish place, sounding in lovely just tunings, and realize how important that is in my heart, and how rare it is in my life. Thus, to come here, where something of the sort is an assumed norm, is a joy indeed. I'm going to change my glasses now so I can read. Surrounded as we almost all are with the Silicon Valley attitude and the label of content provider, along with the turbulence of the economics and the possible piracy of the net, and that may be undermining our underpinnings, when our lights and instruments may be turned off while huge numbers of windmills stand tethered, and this was what happened last year. We nonetheless gather here as friends, scholars, and artists. This is no little thing, considering how minoritized we are. And I want to thank all who are making these meetings possible. I also want to thank my personal assistant, William Sly, who created the charts and tuning aids, which he will project for us. I am sure that each of us has a view of what went wrong to surround us almost everywhere with the dull industrial gray of a global monoculture in 12-tone equal temperament. My own view is fractured. I have the feeling that many over the years have hoped that somehow, if a person went far enough in cycling fifths, actual 3-2s, she would find that this simplest tuning pattern of all would transubstantiate into all the other intervals. Pretending that such is possible seems to me one way of entering that wish fulfillment dream world which now pervades music everywhere, that the West has settled in. The West is, of course, Northwest Asia, which is Europe and its satellite cultures. The other part seems to me to be economic. Imagine being able to manufacture, where there's very little manu in it, rank upon rank of theoretically different instruments, tuned all the same and interchangeable anywhere on the planet. What a super corporation the whole thing implies. And indeed, to my mind, that is what it is. How tender then are our own concerns? The conflicted and complex Harry Partch evaded the professional music world by building an elaborate theoretic structure which he actuated by instruments he made himself. He loved hobos and hoboing and hated the academic world. He was ignited by Helmholtz, became a one-man Studs Terkel, and employed historical and ethnic dramatics in service of his Freudian understandings. He has touched us all. Some of us tend to forget that another rank of musicians, and what's more, they work in major universities, also disrupt the colossus. These are the early music people who have produced a revolution in how symphony concerts are planned. When I was growing up, almost every concert began with a concerto grosso or a Baroque solo concerto. This is almost never the case today, for the early music people have pointed out that the present symphonic instruments are not what the composers wrote for, and, in addition, the tuning is now wrong. Here are allies in our cause. Again, in the universities, ethnomusicologists bring us gamelan and kayabum and ichiriki and kemenche and other ravishments that are not 12-tone equal. The colossal giving in to the delusive wish fulfillment dream that going around in circles will finally come out right is, of course, the very signature of reality abandoned. During the 19th century, the great French musician Saint-Saëns wrote, quote, "The last word is certainly not to be found in our enharmonic half-tone system. The latter is only an approximation, and the time may come when our ear, having become more discerning, will no longer be content with it. Thus another art will be born. The present art will be like a dead language, whose masterpieces remain, though the language is no longer spoken. What this new art will be like is impossible to foresee. For if it should appear before us suddenly, we would be just as incapable of appreciating it as an untrained person from a culture with a different musical tradition is incapable of understanding a Beethoven symphony. Tonality, which has provided the basis for modern harmony, is in the throes of death. The exclusive use of the major and minor modes is over and done with. Ancient modes are re-entering the scene, and following in their footsteps, Oriental modes, in which the variety is immense. These are invading our art. All this will inject new life into worn-out melody, harmonies will change as well, and rhythmics, scarcely explored, will develop. From all this, a new art will be born." That's a quotation from Saint-Saëns. While I am in quotational mode, let me go on a bit. In the first half of the 20th century, the British poet laureate Robert Bridges wrote, quote, "All of this ravishing music is but a light disturbance of the atoms of air, whose jostling ripples gathered within the ear are tuned to resonant scale, and thence by the enthroned mind received on the spiral stairway of her audience chamber as heralds of high spiritual significance," unquote. In reviewing writings of George Santayana, the American philosopher Bridges also wrote, quote, "The philosophy of it is very consonant with my own thought. There is no pretense of hiding the unsolved riddle of life. The Sphinx lurks in all systems, Different schools only hustle her from pillar to post. And if she is driven into any corner where her presence is obvious, her best refuge is in the unsearchable atom. And this is an honester method than that of dismembering her and seeking to hide her mutilated fragments by dispersal, as a piano tuner will distribute the error of his woof all up and down the scale, unquote. Martin Gardner has written, quote, after a crazy theory has been corrected and polished until it no longer seems crazy, but simple and almost inevitable, and the present disorder of the particles has given way to a beautiful order, I believe that the very success of such a theory will lead to deeper levels of dishevelment, unquote. This delightful author has also written, quote, could it be possible that our universe is not the result of random quantum fluctuation, but was deliberately created by a graduate student in another space-time, unquote. For all we know, Dr. Alan Booth of MIT told the New York Times, our universe may have started in someone's basement. David Schramm, University of Chicago physicist, said it this way, quote, unfortunately, the graduate student who designed the experiment is no longer around, and as a result, she can't tell us exactly what she did. Superstring theory now suggests to us that at a tininess inconceivable, small little strings vibrate in all harmonics, and that their combinations produce all that we know and are. And at the other end of size, the background radiation of the universe tells us that there is a standing wave in the universe, and that it is acoustic, having compression and rarefactions. Now, of course, we seek the first harmonic of it. In the middle range, a star familiar to Earthlings, Polaris, which is a Cepheid variable, is pulsing on its first harmonic and may in future skip down to the Cepheid normal of 5.68 days. How at home Pythagoras would be. All this notwithstanding, I am convinced that there is a brain in the universe, and that enough continuous fine-tuning, in addition to producing personal dishevelment, does also, like constant filing with steel against the edges of our awareness, lead to another kind of edge. A conscientious friend of mine who had spent hours tuning in my almost soundproof studio suddenly came in, obviously distressed, and I said, you've touched the abyss, haven't you? Yes, he had it, and he understood. When this happens, there is the best remedy. Rest for a while, really rest, and then pull up the interval again, but this time stop abruptly when the ear in your head says, enough, that's it. After all, strings are sometimes twisted, embouchures fail, or whatnot else, but your whole being will take all such into account and report with pleasure when the averaged out result happily happens. Believe this, it is the best probability. I confess to two capricious perplexities. The first is about what is happening at the bridges, even of steel on a monochord. How much vibrating energy is passing into the bridges from the string, and where does the actual stoppage happen? Then again, more whimsically, is 1 beat a month sufficiently close? I would like to take time here to play you examples of matters that I've been into. Firstly, I would like to play you an example from my advocacy and my pupils' explorations of ancient tunings. Someone in one of the workshops brought up the interval of 28 to 27. That was John who spoke of it, and you heard already what I'm going to talk about. I was reminded immediately of Archytas enharmonic. Its proportions are, in descending order, 5 to 4, 36 to 35, and 28 to 27. A central 9 to 8 is followed by a repeat of the proportions of the original tetrachord. One of my ex-pupils, Larry London, a brilliant clarinetist and a composer, created a wire-strung harp which he learned to play in what is reputed to be the ancient Celtic manner, stopping off strings as he goes. He made a recording of a section of his suite in Arcadis enharmonic. This mode was first written down at about the same time as the building of the Parthenon. The enharmonic is still a useful musical tuning, and it brings us together in time, so to speak. Next, I'd like to introduce you to what I call freestyle. Many years ago, it had occurred to me that almost all the music in the world has been made by moving between the pitches of an already established tuning, various scales and modes. The composition was achieved by moving between fixed places. But there are intervals between fixed pitches, and it occurred to me that one might compose by connecting together in the air whichever intervals one felt needed or wanted in the piece. This method I termed freestyle, as opposed to the strict style of some settled gamut, and I began a short symphony in freestyle of Scardone length. Symphony spelled S-I-M-F-O-N-Y. Shortly afterwards, I was invited by Charles Shear to participate in the opening of a new journal in Berkeley, so I wrote a little piece called Arion's Leap, which Bill Colbig and Richard D. and I recorded at a friend's house. There is a mistaken interval designation somewhere in the piece, but I've forgotten where it is. Arion had a permission of his king employer to take part in a music festival and contest. He won the contest and was returning on a vessel that proved to be of pirates. They took his money. He asked for the right to sing a final song, granted. So he dressed ceremonially and sang. At the end of his performance, he leapt overboard and was carried to shore by the music-loving dolphins who had gathered to hear him. Later at his court, the pirates reported that he had died, and at this moment Arion came out from behind the throne. In composing Arion's Leap, I used no gamut of pitches, only such intervals as I felt need for as the little piece evolved. Just incidentally, when first Harry Partch really realized what I was up to in using this method, he said that it made him dizzy. Kolbig for 33 years. Lived, loved, and worked with him. And he was an extraordinary man. He built lots of instruments. When I met him, he was an electrician. And in what he built, he had the precision and care that a master electrician has. His last real work as an electrician was the installation of the television monitoring system for the San Francisco Opera, so that chorus and soloists could come in on time. He built two large gamelan, the gamelan C. Betty, which we hear, and the Mills gamelan, C. Darius and C. Madeline, named after the Mills and with their permission. The last instrument which he built for me was called a Ptolemy duple, because it included all the duple divisions of the tetrachord that have epimoric ratios, 5 to 4, 16 to 15, 10 to 9, and 6 to 5, and 8 to 7, and 7 to 6. These were arranged with inversions for each. Bill put them all together for me, and it turned out surprisingly well. There are fascinating crossover modes and subtleties of octave use that surprised me. In this example from my homage to Pacifica, Robert Hughes plays the decorated drone on the bassoon. Now, Bill's beautiful C. Betty gamelan, you will note that the pelog, pitch 5 of which is on an A440, rises up contiguous sections of an overtone series. This was actually chosen by Partch, the Indonesian gamelan master. I was improvising on the overtone system in my office one day, here, right back over here, at San Jose State, actually hoping to find a pelog tuning in the series Partch had heard, and he knocked on my door. "The last one you did, please repeat it," he said. He thought for a moment and then said, "It is a good pelog, and what's more, it would be easy to sing with." 12, 13, 14, easy to sing with. But when we made it, sure enough, but I would not have believed it just from the numbers. You will notice both the slender and pelog sections contain a similar quartet, 7-6, 9-7, and 7-6. In Pelog, it begins on the gamelan pitch 1 and in Slendro on low 6. To conclude Homage to Pacifica, I composed a gamelan with chorus setting of the beautiful admonition of Chief Seattle that the earth does not belong to man, but man belongs to the earth. And whatever happens to the earth soon happens to man. I knew that I would be vocally using other tones and mostly wrote with confidence that they would find their proper pitches in relation to the beautiful splendor of sea bedding. The intervals of which Claudius Ptolemy found, quote, most agreeable to the ear, unquote. I did not know that until many years after I thought that I'd invented the tuning. It turned out that vocally, Pop Chocro says that he uses a lower tone adjacent to the lower tone of a wider interval, while I am usually attracted to the higher one. This is in how you put an interval between 7 and 6. Now then, my setting of Chief Seattle from my Homage to Pacifica. It goes on again. To continue, I've long been fascinated by the classic drama, the Greek version and also the French, in which the unities were observed, and certainly in the French heart-wrenching conclusions of plot are arrived at by subtle exchanges of conversation. I wanted to produce a puppet version of Corneille's Cinna. Rod puppets, rod puppets in an sizable home theater. For music, I decided to use a single strong tack piano. I had all but the single strings removed from my piano for ease of tuning and a range of tone colors available. I then conceived a 7-limit tuning which provided me with sufficient variety, sufficient dissonance, and sufficient consonance to suggest the moods of the play. Essentially, I wrote entr'actes for between scenes which foreshadow the events of the drama. Also, in my busy life, I never made the puppets, although I did design possible sceneries and a proscenium for our home theater. A large pit sunk in the concrete slab of our house by about 3 feet deep, so that the puppeteers could stand while showing the figures at the standard level of 4 feet. The contractors who built our home opined that maybe the space was intended for pet alligators or the like. Maybe here's something from, yes. Thank you. That very shortly, in fact, practically now, New Albion is releasing an album of keyboard works of mine in tunings. There are 4 instruments, a large French harpsichord, a very large Spanish harpsichord, the tack piano, done this way, and the forte piano, yes, the old, oh boy, it's beautiful too. And this album is done by Linda Berman Hall of UCSC, and it took the 4 instruments and 6 tunings to make it. There is not a piece in the entire record which is not specially tuned. And speaking of which, I want to end this with the little account of and some hearing of my first piano concerto. I grew acquainted with Keith Jarrett through Dennis Russell Davies, and he called me at some length to ask me to write a piano concerto for him. Since Bill and I were just about leaving the house for a period in New Zealand, I told Keith that it would be a year at least before I could seriously work on the piece. Actually, I went so far as to suggest to him that I had always wanted to write a piano's concerto. 3 pianos, tuned in different tunings for each of the 3 movements. He replied that that would be interesting. Well, I simply settled on a single piano tuning in Kirnberger's number 2, Well Temperament, my favorite. I thought if he would go the whole hog, all 3 pianos on the stage, that I wouldn't saddle him with the whole enchilada. So at any rate, I chose Kirnberger's number 2, Temperament. Thus, my piano concerto with selected orchestra eliminates the woodwinds, who cannot play it, at least in the allegro, and uses, and the upper brass can't either, so it uses only strings, 3 trombones, and 2 harps, as well as percussion. There was nervousness at Carnegie Hall about tuning the pianos, and after I had tuner talk with the man, and suggested the affable Johnny Reinhardt as mediator, I arrived to find that the upstairs rehearsal hall piano was correctly tuned, as well as the big 9-footer on stage. It turned out that Keith had had his home piano tuned in the Kirnberger to get acquainted with it. And did he ever? After his Tokyo premiere with Naoto Otomo and the New Japan Philharmonic, he was of course summoned repeatedly back to the stage, and finally sat down to the same piano to improvise as had been hoped for. When I played this tape for a class at the Cornish College in Seattle later, there was a silence afterwards, and finally a young woman murmured, "How could he ever return to equal temperament after that?" The concerto has been played with fair frequency by a number of distinguished artists in a lot of different places, and finally, just before Ursula Oppens played it once again in Carnegie Hall, I received a friendly phone call from the Steinway Company in New York, asking if I would kindly send to them the full chart and image which you see on the screen. It is, I think, a fairly big step for them to implicitly okay a major Steinway instrument to be retuned, at least into the Kirnberger number 2, Well Tempered. The tuning was recognized by the press, and the representative of the company both said they were beautiful. I chose the 3rd movement because there are places where the strings and piano are in perfect unison, and towards the end, a chromatically moving melodic passage in perfect fourths, which gives some idea of the range and beauty of what is available in the Kirnberger number 2. There. That's the end of it. Thank you. Thank you. That's the end of the slow movement. Then it's followed by a very small but lively little lace work to end with. I have here something that might interest some of you. It's a box of stuff. Some years ago, I was asked by a very avant-garde journal to write something about Harry Partch. And so I did. And at that time, I was very interested in the architecture of the Greek Revival in the United States, which became vernacular architecture, of course. And it suddenly dawned on me that Harry Partch was a sort of late arrival on the Greek Revival scene. And so I wrote an article tying him in quite well with the Greek Revival. After all, we all know he wrote in Greek modes. He also used Greek plays as the basis for his theater works and so on. So I wrote that up and fixed him into the Greek Revival of the United States. There's a paper here that any of you want, I'd be happy to let you have or give you. So I don't know where to distribute it or how to do it, but there it is. Okay, thank you very much.